Reptichip sets the standard for reptile substrates. Made from the highest quality coconut available anywhere in the world, Reptichip allows enthusiasts and keepers to provide their reptiles with the necessary humidity and thermoregulation required for your animals to thrive. You can support the podcast by heading to reptichip.com/snakeboy or visit the link in the description below. This episode is brought to you in part by Exoterra. If you're as passionate about reptiles and amphibians as I am, you know that quality matters. I use Exoterra products on all my reptile and amphibian enclosures, which is why I'm excited to be partnering with them. From naturalistic decor to innovative lighting and enclosures of all sizes, Exoterra has everything you need for your cold-blooded companions. Exoterra, make your reptiles feel at home. This episode is brought to you in part by Unlimited Exotic Pets. Every day is Veranda Day for Nick Lillis, and it shows. At Unlimited Exotic Pets, Nick produces high-quality monitor lizards with a deep commitment to ethical care practices and top-tier nutrition. These aren't just pets. They're responsibly bred, ethically raised animals. Whether you're looking for a new companion, starting a breeding project, or anything in between, Nick has you covered. Unlimited Exotic Pets, keeping and breeding quality without limitations. Love reptiles? Don't miss this. If you're passionate about reptiles, amphibians, and everything cold-blooded, Reptiles magazine is a must-have. Each issue is packed with expert care tips, stunning photography, and the latest news in the reptile world. Whether you're a seasoned herpetologist or just starting your reptile journey, this magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and stay informed on the best ways to care for your scaly friends. For only $14.99 a year, you can step outside your algorithm and get exposure to things that you wouldn't normally see or learn about. My family reads Reptiles magazine, and you should too. Visit subscribe.reptilesmagazine.com to get started. This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Talking about teaching fifth graders and how to not lose your mind.
I tell you.
So this is episode 103 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm joined by John Michels from Black Pearl Reptiles. John, how did you get to be so obsessed with is it Drymarchon or Drymarchon?
I've always said Drymarchon, but
Drymarchon.
I don't pretend to be right about things.
Well, so how many indigos and crebos do you have altogether?
People ask me that question, and it really depends on the season. Right now I'm still in the mode of working on selling all my 2025 babies. So it's a lot. It could be anywhere from 100 to 400 depending on what time of year it is. So right now I'm a little busy.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so the first thing I want to ask you about and it's the biggest thing, it gives me the most apprehension about owning an indigo is the poop.
Yep, I saw that question coming.
Yeah. How bad is it in reality? Because I feel like, I was very apprehensive about getting short tail pythons because of the stories I've heard about the pee.
Right.
And then once I got them, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. It's legit. It's the consistency is something like wet cement, and they have the ability to project. So, I mean, you can hear it happening. You just finished cleaning and you're in the room and you hear it and you're like, oh man, I just cleaned. But anyway, but my point is though, is that there are things that you can do to mitigate it. And so, I've got obviously a high volume of indigos in one space. And what I use are compressed pine pellets that I get from a feed store. And they use them in horse stables. And the idea of the compressed pine pellet, you can also buy compressed paper, and they come in little pellets. But the idea is that when any kind of liquid or odor hits it, it just disintegrates and absorbs it all. So it really does a great job of absorbing, the odor and the liquid, in the fecals. So that for me, that is absolutely essential if you're going to be keeping a high volume of Drymarchon in your space. And even if you have a couple, it makes a big difference. So I've talked to people and sold people where they keep indigos in their home, in their living room or something like that. And it's absolutely essential because it can be stinky, and it can be a problem. But if you use the compressed pellets that absorb all of that odor and all that liquid, it really is a life changer.
Okay. All right. So, and you can get those at like a Tractor Supply or something like that?
Something like that. I buy mine from a local mom and pop feed store, but they call it stable blend in some places, but it's just compressed pine pellets. You can buy them in pet shops too and buy it online with compressed paper that people will use in like rabbit enclosures and whatever else. But it's just compressed pellets is what you want.
Okay. And is their diet, does their diet affect the consistency? Like, can you mitigate it to a certain extent by giving a more stable diet or a less varied diet, or do you recommend a varied diet?
I absolutely recommend a varied diet. When you're talking about odor, varied diets are great, and you'll find that your snake is a lot happier with a varied diet. That being said, I don't do a high proportion of fish for that reason, because that can get stinky. But an average meal for me is, for an adult indigo, is a small to medium rat, not too big. They're not really designed to handle large prey items, and a chick. And and then I'll mix in other things here and there, but that's an average meal for me, and doing something like that once a week for an adult.
Okay. And so they're eating once a week, a small to medium rat with a chick. And what about if, like for a baby, like if somebody were to buy a baby from you, how are you feeding that animal right away?
Well, the babies can be a challenge, because they're such prey generalists in the wild. They'll eat literally anything they can fit in their mouth in the wild, and they're wired to want, different things. So feeding trials when you have hatchlings can be a little challenging because, you might have one snake that wants a bird, you want quail or chick or something like that. And you have another snake that would prefer fish, and you have another snake that might prefer lizard or other snakes or something like that. So part of the challenge in feeding hatchlings is, the norm in our industry is that the expectation is that people would like to have their snakes feeding on rodents. And so a lot of my work from, August through December is getting babies feeding on rodents so they're ready for buyers. So that's kind of the plan, and they'll eat as much as you want to feed them. But in general, with hatchlings and youngsters, I prefer smaller meals, but a little bit more frequent. So I might go every, 4 or 5 days. And instead of giving, say a mouse hopper, it might be 2 fuzzies. In general, they like something, not the big bulky prey item, but maybe a couple of smaller ones and a little bit more frequent. They do have fast metabolisms. You feed them and they might be pooping 2 days later or the day after sometimes, depending on your temperature setup and all of that. But smaller, more frequent meals, and I do like to vary the diet. But that being said, a lot of the focus, so I can get them ready for new homes, is getting them on rodents. And once they're really well established on rodents and that they're not going to regress in their food response or anything like that, then, start mixing things in. You can do tilapia strips or, strips of fish or quail. There are a couple people out now that are breeding and selling button quail, which are great for baby indigos, baby Drymarchon. So, once you kind of feel like they're really consistent with their feeding, mixing it up is always a great idea.
Okay. And how many times a week are you feeding a baby?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little bit more frequent than once a week.
Okay.
5,
So
6
maybe like
days, 4, 5,
okay.
6 days, something like that, depending on how it's going. And once I feel like they're really solid, I might peel back to just once a week. But when I'm trying to really build that feeding response and make sure that they're ready for a new home and really well established and all of that, I might go twice a week.
What is the best pet Drymarchon in your opinion? Like, or what would be the best one for somebody to get started with?
Entry level Drymarchon.
Yeah.
Well, I work. There are 6 major subspecies, and I work with all of them. And really, there's not a ton of difference between the 6 as far as husbandry goes and as far as temperament goes. They all have, little differences in what makes, between the two and what makes them maybe a little bit more handleable or a little bit more consistent feeding or whatever else. But in the end, they're all pretty similar. They all get pretty much to the same size. You take care of them pretty much the same way. So, as hatchlings, I find that, sometimes ones that are a little bit more defensive might be a Texas Indigo or a Yellowtail, but really it doesn't matter a ton really with all of them. Handling, they figured out really quickly how to be chill, really with all the Drymarchon. So I wouldn't let that dissuade you from any certain subspecies that you like. The only other thing as far as entry level goes is cost. Some are quite a bit more expensive than others. And in general, if you're getting into a new project and you don't necessarily know what you're getting into, you've done your research, but you haven't actually done it yourself. I don't know. I generally advise people to spend a little less and get the cheaper version, which would be more like a blacktail Crebo or a unicolor Crebo. But they could really all work for a beginner.
The yellowtails are so beautiful. I mean, I've seen some that they look like a king cobra. It's
right.
Wild. Like they just look absolutely incredible. I've the poop is definitely the biggest. That's the scariest thing for me.
Right.
I mean, like, so how many times a week do they go to the bathroom? Is it a good 2-3 times a week?
It can be. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously depends on your feeding schedule, but yeah, I mean, it can be like that. I know some people that prefer to use, newspaper or paper towel or something as a substrate in the caging. And I don't get how you can do that because you're cleaning multiple times per week and it's just not very absorbing, and that can be a mess. So it's using those pine pellets is a big game changer for me, for sure.
Yeah, I was after I heard that they can go up to 3 times a week, I was kind of paying attention to my own collection, and I noticed my Timor python had 3 bowel movements in 1 week, and I'm like, oh, well, this isn't that bad, but it's also not liquid,
right?
It's solid,
right? Yeah, well, with I don't have a ton of experience in the python and boa world, but if you want to compare them to other colubrids, they're pretty similar to false water cobras as far as that kind of metabolism and amount of fecal matter. Bull snakes can be pretty stinky too, so if you've worked with any of those, then you're at least somewhat prepared to deal with Drymarchon poop.
Yeah. So if somebody's getting a well-established baby from you, how are you recommending that they set that animal up in the beginning?
That's a good question. And I actually, a little while back, I added this to my care sheet that I have on my website, is that there are times when baby indigos or Crebos can kind of regress in their food response when they go to a new home. They're intelligent animals. And they're more aware, and they're more open to stimulation, especially visual stimulation, and so they can get stressed out um, in a new home. So one thing that I always recommend is, and you should really be doing this with anything that you buy, is quarantine first. You know, put it in. I mean, I recommend putting them in tubs just to start out with. Put them in tubs. Put them in something that doesn't have a lot of visual stimulation. A reasonably sized, smaller tub, and get it feeding and get it going, and you guys get to know each other and all of that, and then at some point you can start moving that up to pretty much any type of enclosure you like. There's some people do the rack thing and some people do the cage thing. But I have noticed in general that, baby Drymarchon can be a little sensitive to visual stimulation. So if you have a big cage with, glass cage on all four sides and all of that, sometimes they'll, freak out a little bit, and that manifests itself by a little bit less of a feeding response. So even though it's established when it leaves my house, sometimes they'll regress a little bit. So I recommend people keeping them in just a quarantine tub for a couple months. And what you'll find too is that with baby Drymarchon, there comes a time, and this is kind of a weird thing to describe, you just kind of have to experience it on your own, but there comes a time when they develop a confidence and they develop this sort of dominance of their area. And when you have hatchlings, 99 times out of 100, you go into their enclosure and they run, and they don't want to see you. They don't want to be, they're flighty, and they're not going to take food off of tongs or anything like that. But there comes a point, and sometimes it's a month of age, sometimes it's 6 months of age. There comes a point where something switches in their head, and when you open their tub or their enclosure, whatever else, they come out saying, "Who's this in my space?" And they come to check you out. And then that's when you can start feeding off of tongs. And then they, develop this food response that they're sort of famous for, of, diving at anything that's comes near them as something that they can eat. But there's a point where that switches over. And when you hit that point, then it doesn't really matter if they have visual stimulation in their cage or not. You're in a cage, you're in a rack, whatever else, it doesn't matter, because they have that confidence in their space.
Mm. And do you have an idea, like, do you kind of know around what age that happens at?
It can really depend on the individual. Some of them are pretty flighty. Some of them, take more time than others. There's some species that start faster. For example, Texas indigos are by far and away, not even close, the easiest to get established on rodents, the easiest to develop an aggressive feeding response early on. Texas indigos are head and shoulders above the rest, while some of the others are a lot more finicky, a lot more shy, a lot more, wanting to flee rather than come and investigate what's going on. And it makes a difference. So, there are some variations between the different species.
So I'm in Florida, and I would love to have an Eastern indigo. I saw an Eastern when I was a kid, and it got burned into my memory. But then I see two things: the permit requirements, which, and then also just the price tag. They're
right,
considerably more expensive.
Right.
So would a Texas indigo be a good substitute for an Eastern, just for from a cost perspective and from just the ease of getting the animal?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the for those people that don't know, an Eastern indigo, they're federally protected. And what that means is that the federal government can't dictate what you own, but what they can do is regulate interstate commerce. And so if you're shipping an indigo, you purchase an indigo from one state to another, you have to obtain a federal interstate commerce permit to give you permission to move this snake across state lines. Once it's at your house, then it's up to the state on whether or not you're allowed to actually own that where you live. So Eastern indigos are the only ones that are protected like that. So you can own Texas indigos, Mexican indigos, I think, are something that could be a great alternative to Eastern indigos. None of those are regulated. You don't need any sort of permitting for that. So For people that don't want to deal with the interstate commerce permit or the price tag of an Eastern Indigo, I would absolutely recommend a Texas Indigo and or a Mexican Indigo. Mexican Indigos have a couple different color phases, and there are black phase Mexican Indigos that are jet black with a nice white chin, and they're basically the same thing as an Eastern Indigo, but you don't have the permit requirements, and they're half the price.
I've seen some. I mean, Easterns just look so damn cool. I mean, because they have like that really black, like patternless back sometimes,
Right.
and then the red chin and belly, and it's just such a nice combo. Like, do the Mexicans and the Texas Indigos, like, do they ever come in those phases?
Yes and no. The Texas Indigos on average, I mean, there are a lot more variability with Texas Indigos than people think. But Texas Indigos on average will have more of a copper color on the face and on the throat, kind of a yellowy orange salmon color on the throat. And they'll often have that same sort of brownish copper color in dorsal banding across the top and in modeling. The amount of that varies by individual, varies by lineage, and there are some that are very dark, very black, and it's almost Eastern-like. And then there are others where it's really a light-colored mottled animal with a lot of browns mixed in with the blacks on the dorsal. So it really kind of depends, but you can get Texas Indigos that can look pretty dark. Mexican Indigos, they're a little bit more uniform in color. They don't generally have that modeling on the top. I'm talking about the black phase Mexicans. And so it'll be that shiny, iridescent, inky black on the top. And that might be really, jet black, or it might be a little bit more of a charcoal gray, depending on the individual. But they're absolutely an underrated snake that if you like Eastern Indigos, you should be considering those also.
Yeah, it's there's just so many options available, and so many different phases. I know I've seen I think Kevin Butts has like these jet black Texas Indigos.
Yeah. I have some for
and
yeah.
Oh my God, they're incredible. Like it's like a giant just black snake. It's incredible.
Right.
Is there like how is the Drymarchon community as far as like if you were to get like a fully jet black Texas, could you cross it with a red phase Texas, and would that not be frowned upon, or would that be frowned upon because now you're crossing lineage or something?
That's a good question too. In general, if I were to sort of stereotype the Drymarchon community, people are generally a little bit less about morphs, and they're more sensitive and thoughtful towards inbreeding for good reason. A lot of the Drymarchon are pretty sensitive to inbreeding, and you don't want to be doing, related animals bred together, especially across multiple generations. The majority of the Drymarchon community is not about crossing or hybridizing. The majority of us, there are a couple people off and left center that are doing their thing, but in general, Drymarchon people are generally about wild type looks, and we're generally about genetic strength and rather than a certain look or a type or something like that. That being said, personally, my personal viewpoint is that I think you got to stay within a subspecies. I wouldn't be doing things like breeding a Mexican Indigo to a Texas Indigo. That's not my thing. But if you have a different sort of color phase within the same subspecies, I don't really have a problem with that.
So that would be totally acceptable by the community to take two Texas Indigos of different phases and put them together. Would that actually be is that something that you would actually look to do in a breeding project because they would be from different lines?
I think so. It's everyone has their own viewpoint. I don't want to speak for the entire community, but But my feeling is that if it's taxonomically the same snake, then, fair game, you know. So I think doing something like that can sometimes be a good idea, particularly when you're looking at improving genetic strength. And that's important to a lot of the people in the Drymarchon community, right? So if you feel like one lineage might be a little bit more less genetically diverse, breeding in the exact same subspecies, but from a different lineage, maybe a different color look or something like that, breeding that into it to improve the genetic strength is really always a good idea.
Mm. Huh. Yeah, because I I sit there and I think like, man, what if I got like a high red Texas from you and a really black phase from Kevin, and then crossed them? Like, would it what would the offspring look like? Have you played with things like that where you try to take two traits that are really attractive to you and cross them?
Yeah, I would imagine that you would get, across the spectrum, you would get some animals looking dark like Kevin's, and then have some animals with some more of the red stuff like mine, and then everything in between, So it'd be hard to say what would come out, but you'd probably get a smattering of all different looks, So again, not a terrible idea. It's but I'll be honest. A lot of what we do, particularly with respect to Easterns, is sometimes I don't even look at the color of the animal. I'm just thinking, especially with Easterns, I'm just thinking more like, I know these two animals are vastly unrelated, or as unrelated as I can get them, and I know they're both genetically strong. Let's put these two together. And so when I get a clutch of babies, particularly with Easterns, I'm not really analyzing like, oh, these came out really red or these are really pretty or something like that. I think just as much, hey, these things are gigantic and they're robust and they're strong and they want to eat well out of the gate and stuff like that. So that's a lot of when I'm thinking about like choosing holdbacks for myself or, something like that. I think a little less color and I think a little bit more, genetics, and lineages and what's going to make good, big, strong animals.
So that's the big thing that you're looking at is how robust is this animal? How, is it willing to feed, are those are the traits you're looking to pass on.
Right.
And what are some of the problems that you might run into in regards to inbreeding?
They're more prevalent in Eastern Indigos than in other Drymarchon, and that's for a reason that they're protected. And so there hasn't been fresh blood legally coming into the pet trade in several decades. And so this is sort of a hot button issue. And we could talk for a really long time about this, about what actual physical traits represent inbreeding and what don't. But, in my mind, there are some physical traits that can be passed on through the generations that are detrimental, and there are ones that are not. And for me, the detrimental ones are dwarfism, which is hard to recognize as hatchlings. You don't really see it, but what generally happens is once the snakes hit about 1 or 2 years of age, sometimes a little older, they stop growing longer and they start getting fatter. And you'll see in Eastern Indigo, I've seen it a couple times in Texas Indigos too, where they get about 4 feet long and then they just start getting chunky and they just stop growing lengthwise where they should be 6, 7 feet long. And so dwarfism is an issue that can pop up. I've seen it in Easterns where it's probably more common in Easterns. I've seen it in Texans and I've seen it in blacktail grebos. The other one is enlarged hearts. And that's another thing that you can't really see when they're hatchlings. And it generally develops at 1 or 2 years of age, but they can start getting an enlarged heart as they're getting older. And that can be fatal for the snake too. So it's important when you're putting together a breeding group of Drymarchon, definitely in Eastern Indigos and also in the other subspecies as well. It's important that you are choosing animals that are as unrelated as possible. So you either need to be getting your animals from different sources, or if you're working with a breeder that has a diverse enough group that the breeder can say, hey, you can put this male with this female. They're completely unrelated to each other because I have several lineages, something like that. But either way, you have to be mindful of your pairings. And if it's your intention to breed, and if it's your intention to breed good, strong animals that are not inbred, you have to really think about it and get as much information as you can about the lineages of the snakes that you're buying. So when they do become adults and they're breedable, that you're producing good clutches, and that you definitely don't want to be doing siblings and you don't want to be doing cousins or anything like that, across the board in Drymarchon and especially in Eastern Indigos.
Interesting. So that's yeah, because that's really common with pythons and boas, where it's like, hey, is so and so had a litter or a clutch, and yeah, I'm going to get a pair, and
Right.
and you just pick up the pair. So like I'm kind of conditioned to that being the norm,
Right. Yeah, and it's the norm in a lot of projects. You can king snakes and corn snakes and whatever else. It's not that inbreeding doesn't exist in other species, but Drymarchon are just more sensitive to it. I don't know the scientific explanation behind it all, but they're just more sensitive to it, and you want to avoid it as much as you can in the Drymarchon world. And fortunately, there are enough people that are starting to breed Drymarchon that you can find opportunities where you can put together unrelated pairs as part of a breeding group, but it's something that you should be mindful of.
What is it that drew you to Drymarchon?
Oh man. The history of my breeding was I started with Honduran milk snakes, that I liked colubrids, and I wanted colubrids that were relatively hardy, and when I'm producing offspring, that I'm not going to be like gray banded kings or something where I'm going to have to be, working really hard to get them established on feeders. It started with that, and then it popped up that a local guy near me had a pair of adult blacktail Crebos for sale. And I went over to his house and I checked them out. And I just thought they were the coolest thing ever. Like we were mentioning earlier, they're very Cobra-like. I've never had the opportunity to work with cobras myself, but I've sold to a number of people who work with venomous, and they say this is the closest you can get to a cobra, a non-venomous cobra. And anyway, I bought them and I brought them home, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to get them to breed right out of the gate. And, I had 20 plus babies. It was a big clutch. And then it was, I had all these people that were wanting to buy them from me, and I'm accepting deposits and I'm getting all excited. And then I was like, oh shoot, I got to get these things feeding, and I had no idea really what I was doing, because my intention when I started breeding was to do things that were easier, and that was trial by fire. That was learn and figure it out, because I had accepted other people's money as deposit for animals that needed to get established, and so had to figure it out and get it done. So from there it was, man, these are the coolest snakes I've ever owned. And then I had to have them all. It was like it was just a quick addiction. And then I went and bought a pair of Eastern Indigo babies, and then from there, I have to have all 6 subspecies. And I met my business partner, and he was into it too. So we combined my collection and his collection, and then worked together ever since. And it's been 20 years, so it's been pretty cool.
Wow. So what have you learned along the way? Like what are some of the biggest things that you feel like you've risen to the occasion and you've conquered in the past 20 years?
Well, there's so much to doing what we all do, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed is being able to work with a business partner that I see eye to eye with, and that we agree on everything. And I think that really kind of steps up your game quite a bit when you're talking about your husbandry techniques and your ability to figure stuff out, because you have that ability to collaborate with someone where I'm not always learning from a mentor, but I'm also not always teaching a protege. I'm working together with someone, and we're both challenging each other. And it might be, hey, did you think of this? Or hey, I figured this out. What are you doing at your house that's similar? And so we have those conversations literally on a weekly basis for decades. And so I think it just leads to fine tuning how you're taking care of the animals. And that's from a husbandry perspective, and then from there, it became a business at some point where I'm, working on trying to sell babies and all that sort of thing too, which is a whole nother set of things that I find enjoyable.
Is it all like how challenging is it, working the sales aspect? Because you go through all this effort, you've amassed this giant collection of incredible animals,
Right.
and you put all this thought into making sure that you're outcrossing and not inbreeding, and and you have your business partner that you're bouncing things off of, and then you get these babies and you have to put all this effort into getting them started. Right. And then you have to deal with idiots like me with questions.
Right. Yeah, well, I get it. And what you find though is that you can weed people out pretty quickly. There are people that genuinely want to know and learn, and you got to respect that. I always tell people, do your research, and I would rather you buy from me next year and not this year, to give you time to do what you need to do. And those are the people. And unfortunately, I think we're in an industry where people can be pretty capricious, and people can be pretty whimsical on how they buy things. And, you see people all the time, they buy something and man, I want to be a Drymarchon breeder and all those sorts of things. And a year later, they're selling what they have so they can go on to the next project or the next thing, or, they're not into snakes anymore, they're into guitars or whatever. It's this sort of addictive personality where people want the newest and best and coolest thing. But really, to be successful, and you ask about one thing I've learned over the last 20 years, is that really, to be successful in what you're doing, you have to have a certain amount of stubbornness to be able to say, this is what I love, this is what I like, and I'm going to stick with it until I figure it all out. And, unfortunately, we're in an industry where a lot of people don't do that. They're bouncing from one project to the next project to the next project. And 1 minute you're into monitors, and the next minute you're into indigos, and the next minute you're into that. And you don't really gain any level of expertise until you can really stick with something for a long time.
Yeah. You're never going to get that 20,000 hours if you're
right. That's right.
Just bouncing around. It's one of the, I peruse Facebook Marketplace a lot, and the amount of times all of a sudden, like, ARS racks will show up,
right?
Or giant, this huge multiple stacks of vision cages,
right? And
incubators and all this stuff. And the person's like, yeah, I'm getting out of the hobby.
Right.
And it's like, and I use the word hobby a lot because it is a hobby. But also, if you don't have that passion, forget about it, right. And like that's what excites me about like talking to you. And, and, I found that with, quite a few of the people that are breeding Drymarchon is the passion is incredible. Like the people that are doing it and have been doing it for like a decade or more, the passion that's there is just, it's unmatched,
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that's worth something, there are a lot of people that are, doing it for the first time, and that's great. You have to start somewhere, and you want to be able to gain that. But, in the end, when I'm purchasing animals for myself, I for one, I'm not telling anyone how to do it, but I prefer to purchase from someone who's been around for longer and has been working with the animals for longer and have that passion and that care for the animals. And they want to see their animals being successful in a new home, and they're willing to take the time to work with their buyers to make sure that things are going right. And so that's what I value when I'm buying from other people. Where, obviously there are some in our industry that just want to buy the cheapest one they see on Morph Market,
Yeah. Yeah. And so if somebody's buying from you, they're getting care after the sale.
I always try, and I try to make myself approachable, and I'm happy to help in any way, and I want to see the animals do well. Like you said, you put a lot of time and energy into those babies, and it's not just for the income. It's because, like you said, we have a passion for the animals. We care about the animals. It can be tough. There's only a certain amount of weeding out of buyers that you can do. Some people, yeah, I try not to say, hey, you shouldn't own this animal, because everyone needs to start somewhere, and everyone needs to learn, learn how to take care of these animals and to do it well. However, there are absolutely times when people come to me and they want to buy an indigo and they say or do something that is pretty off brand. And if I, try to educate a little bit and there's a resistance as, you know what, this is not for you. You should purchase from
Mm.
somebody else. I had a guy come to me at a show once and he wanted to buy an Eastern indigo, and he wanted to put it, he lived, I don't remember exactly where, but he lived in a hot climate desert area, and he wanted to put it in an outdoor pen together with his anaconda,
Oh, what?
and I'm sorry, you should just go purchase from somebody else. This is not for you, you know. But I
Jeez.
also don't want to be that guy who's, who's, I don't want to be, looking down on people who have less of an experience level, because we all need to learn. So I try to remember to collaborate with people and to teach and educate and be respectful of people that are trying to do their research and to learn. But some people are just not ready.
Oh my God, dude. If somebody, I'd be like, what are you, stupid?
Right.
That would be
Yeah.
like, that's such a dumb idea. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So did you take the time to say like, these snakes are going to overheat and die if you do that?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I
And
say
he was
that
just like,
because I don't want him to go buy from the next guy and then put somebody else's indigo outside either. And I tried to explain it to him, and I did it calmly and tactfully. That's the way I try to roll. And I got pushback. I got argument. I got, no, I know what I'm doing, and I have all this experience and all of that. It's time for you to move on. Just walk away.
oh
Right.
boy, God bless.
Right. Exactly. So, it's you want to see your animals go to good homes. You can only vet people, to a certain degree when you're selling remotely. But yeah, I try to help people make sure that their animals are successful.
So talk to me about vending shows. Is that
Mhm.
something you do often, or are you only doing like large events? Like you were at Kalubert Fest, correct?
Right. Right. I'll be honest. I don't always do the shows. I'm not a big show guy. Historically, I've done shows probably twice a year. I'm not doing the monthly show circuit or anything like that. I'll do shows twice a year. And generally, outside of Kalubert Fest, they're just local here to California. And I'm just doing the big ones. What you generally find is that when you have sort of higher price tag animals like I do, that they're not for everyone in the room. And, there's 95% of people don't know what you have, and don't want what you have and whatever else. But you get that few people that come up and they'll say, I've walked all around the room and there's nothing in here that interests me but your table, and I'm just going to hang out here for a while,
Hmm.
and those are the people you end up chatting with, and it's all great. But anyway, the shows are quite a bit of work. My online sales have always historically been good. But I do like to do the shows in small doses, because you end up collaborating with those people that have a common passion. And when Clint and Zach put together and Mickey put together Kalubert Fest, I missed the first year through, but I heard so many good things about it, and I went, this past year on their second time around, thinking, I don't know if the sales will be kind of worth, flying out there and getting a hotel and doing all that kind of stuff. But at least I know that I'm going to go and hang out with some really cool people.
Yeah.
And these are people that are into colubrids. And, one of the things that Clint and Zach preach a lot is community and collaboration. And there are times when I'm just focused on all my online sales and just what's going on here in my own snake room, that I'm not doing very much of that, and I miss it at times. So that's one thing that I really enjoy about shows, and Kalubert Fest in particular, is just being able to hang out with like-minded people in person. And there were so many people that came up to me and said, "Hey, I bought a snake from you, 3 years ago," and but we'd never met. And so it was great to be able to just shake people's hands and look people in the eye and just sit and talk and schmooze and talk about all the animals that we love. And the sales portion was as an aside to all that at Colubrid Fest. And, while I did end up selling, enough to make my trip worth it and to make the financial part make sense, it wasn't about that. It was about just hanging out with people and having a good time. And I really valued that. Over a dozen different people that I'd communicated with quite a bit over the years, over the decades, really, and had never met. And so I really enjoyed that portion. So I intend to, do Colubrid Fest next year. I do the local shows here in Southern California, the Reptile Super Show, which is a gigantic event. But it's a lot of energy and it's a lot of time to pack up and be vending at the shows. And it's just, me really. So I don't do a lot of them, but what I do, I really enjoy.
Is that because Drymarchon are such a specialized sort of animal that you don't like in your mind, do you not really want to be selling to somebody that's just like walking around and says, "Hey, I'll take one of those. That looks cool."
Right.
It's not like like, I hate to say this, but it's not like a ball python or a corn snake.
Right. Well, exactly. What you'll find though, there's certainly some degree of that, right? But what you'll find though too is that there's a financial barrier to kind of protect against some of that, and the spontaneous purchases lessen when you're talking about $1,000 snake as opposed to $100 snake, right? And so in general, if someone's going to purchase from me a show, it's usually not an off the cuff purchase for them. It's usually, "Hey, I've been looking at these for a while. I'm so glad you're here. Let's talk." And those are the people that generally end up purchasing from me at a show. It's usually not someone who's walking by like, "Oh, look, a pretty black snake. Let me give you $2,000 for your Eastern Indigo." Like it happens, but not quite that much. In general, when people purchase from me at a show, it's they've been looking at it. They've been looking at the species for a while. They've researched it a bit, and either they have something prearranged with me, or they come by and say, "Oh man, I'm glad you're here. I've been looking for a Drymarchon," and we start a conversation. But the spontaneous purchases tend to lessen when you have higher price tag animals.
Yeah, I don't own any colubrids, but I plan on going to Colubrid Fest. It seems like a really cool show. My friend Phil King is enticing me to go, so I think it would be a lot of fun to go to it next time.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the way Clint and Zach would describe it is really sincere and it's genuine, and the way that they represent what goes on there is legitimate. It's not an expo, it's an event, and it's a chance for you to be able to be meeting other people, hanging out with other people, and learning from other people, and teaching other people, and making those connections. And so, if you're not into colubrids or not into colubrids yet, there's absolutely value in going to a show like this, because it's the presentations are amazing. One of the, if you don't know, they do a whole day full of presentations where, all day Saturday, you're listening and watching people's presentations on various topics. And one of the compliments that I gave, Zach, who put together, all the presentations, was say, look, one thing that I really took away from is you had people in the room that are considering buying their first reptile. You know what I mean? And they might go out and buy someone's corn snake or hognose. But you also had people in the room that have been breeding for 50 years, and some of these guys are my mentors, the pillars of the generation of the industry. And I think every presentation had some kind of takeaway for everyone in the room. No matter how much of a newbie you are or how experienced you are, there was something that you could take away from it. And so literally every presentation, there was something where I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, and I've been doing it for a while. And there are a lot of people in the room that are doing it for a hell of a lot longer than me. So Anyway, I would say to someone like you who's not yet into colubrids, it's absolutely something that you can find value in,
Mm.
and that you'll have a good time doing, because again, it's more of an event and less of an expo. And there's definitely takeaways that you'll enjoy.
Yeah, I'm excited to go. And not to mention, I mean, I had Dr. Loafman on the podcast, and
Hmm.
God dang, that's one smart guy. I mean,
Sure.
it was absolutely fantastic talking to him and
Sure.
learning from him.
Hmm.
And I can't wait to have Clint on. So you had mentioned mentors. Who are some of your mentors? Like who have you learned a lot from over the years?
It first started out when, like, as I mentioned before, I was breeding Hunter and Milks. It first started out with Shannon Brown, who's now not with us anymore. And, Shannon was one of the original guys who was doing all the milk snakes and a lot of the Pituophis, and he was a colubrid guy. And so we collaborated quite a bit. And then, I have local mentors like Gary Kiesler, and I love chatting with guys like Jerry Hartley. And I'm a big field herper guy as well. And so I like being able to talk with locality people, not only about field stuff, but about breeding, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I had an opportunity to sit and chat a number of years ago with Craig Trumbauer for a whole afternoon. And it was amazing,
Yeah.
and it circles back a little bit to one of the things that Clint and Zach talk about at Colubrid Fest, is that, there's a responsibility that some of us need to remember. And that is that to take the time to be able to listen and answer questions and to teach, instead of being dismissive of people that come to you with basic questions, right? And that's one of the things that I've found valuable about my mentors, is that you sit and talk to a guy like Craig Trumbauer, and here he has decades of experience, and I'm nobody, right? And you sit and talk with him, and he looks you straight in the eye as you're talking, and he asks you what your experience is, and you tell him a story, and he's nodding and he's listening, and he wants to hear everything that you have to say, you know.
Mm.
And if there's anything that is more valuable to a mentor, I don't, from a mentor, I don't know. Just that they want to hear what you have to say, despite that they have decades more experience than you, and they're asking you questions, and they're wanting to learn from you, instead of having that ego. And that's one of the things that I liked about Colubrid Fest too, is that, kind of the mantra was check your ego at the door and take time to talk to everybody, and let's talk to each other. And
Wow.
and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about some of my mentors, is that they're ready and willing to answer questions, but they're also interested in what I have to say, which is nice. And so, to not have that ego getting in the way is valuable.
It's hilarious that you said that you're nobody.
Yeah, well, listen, but that's part of the thing too, is that, when you start letting the ego creep in, it's when you're thinking that you're somebody, and while I have more experience than a lot of people, I also have less experience than a lot of people, and that's really one of the things that I try to remember when I'm trying to stay, grounded, is that I still have a lot to learn too, and sometimes people with less experience than me are teaching me things, and
Mm.
and that's, part of why I like sitting in some of these presentations and whatever else, is that I try to remember to have a hunger to be learning more and to be improving. And if you're not doing that in any aspect of your life, you can get stagnant, and that's not good. And that's when ego creeps in.
Yeah, when you think that you're the pinnacle, that you're the top dog, that probably isn't good for you.
There's always someone better than you.
So are this is like totally unrelated to what we're talking about, but I just had this thought go through my head. Are Drymarchon like are they being sold and bred in captivity in Europe, and like are North American species, are they available around the world, or are they sort of just an American thing?
No, they're actually pretty popular internationally, and quite a bit of my sales are international sales.
Really?
They're popular in Europe. They're also popular in Asia. They've become increasingly popular in Asia in the last 5 years or so. Yeah, it's definitely a global thing for sure.
Wow. So the majority of your sales are outside the US?
I wouldn't say the majority, but a good amount.
Wow. That's interesting. I had
Hmm.
no idea.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and people are starting to breed them there as well. And once that starts happening, the demand for importing American snakes will go down because if they can get them on their own, they don't need to import. But so that's starting to happen to some degree. But yeah, I send a good amount of my snakes to both Europe and Asia, and every now and again to Canada. Uh-huh.
wow. But the Easterns cannot leave the US?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. But they can get Texas and all that good stuff.
Right. So Easterns cannot be exported outside of the U.S. and unless you have crazy zoo permits and whatever else, it's not really even worth it. Um, so, but any other Drymarchon species is not protected at all from international commerce. So they're not CITES, they're not anything else. So you can ship them like you would a corn snake anywhere around the world.
Wow. What was it like traveling to Fest? How did that work? Like, what were the logistics of that, of getting your animals there? And were you able to take Easterns with you or no?
No, no, I didn't. I chose not to bring Easterns. Um, I'm pretty sure if you were to ask anyone in the federal office that they would have had a problem with it. Technically speaking, you need the permit to sell an Eastern across state lines, but I think under that umbrella would be if I take my own animals to another state and then sell them in that state, that also would not be cool. So I didn't do that. But what I did was I shipped all of my snakes the day before I got on the airplane to a FedEx hub, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I had a friend who was already out there and picked them up for me. And they were waiting for me, in my hotel room. And got them all set up at the show, sold what I sold. And then when I had finished, I asked Clint to take my animals that didn't sell and ship them back to me. And so we just did that FedEx both ways. I had a label pre-made and all set up, and I just handed him the box. It already had a label on it, and all he had to do was drop it off, and he was happy to do it, and it worked out. So,
Wow.
yeah, so that was getting the animals there, and then logistically, Fort Wayne was pretty easy. I was able to just fly right there. I did have one connecting flight to get over there, I think through Dallas or whatever. But the venue, the hotel, everything is all within a close distance. There, it's not LA traffic or anything, and everything was really pretty logistically easy to do. So I was happy with how all that went down.
That's awesome. I'm glad it was a positive experience and that you'll be going back.
For sure. Yeah, it was great.
Did you do any talks? Would you consider doing a talk on Drymarchon?
I'd be happy to. However, that's not really what they do. And here's the logic, as I understand it from talking with them, is that they generally avoid talks on species.
Hmm.
They don't want to be like, hey, here, let's all learn about hognose snakes, or let's all learn about indigo snakes. It's more topics that they do. And so it was providing your snakes enrichment. It was parasitology. It was, husbandry stuff, and it was, John Lasseter gave a great talk on, some of the old Applegate enclosures where, snakes have underground access inside of their enclosure, and how can you set that up? And so I find that I thought it was a good idea, so while I'd be happy to give a, Drymarchon presentation, that's not really what they do. They want to have presentations that are more universally accessible to everybody. And if you're not interested in, indigos, you're not going to want to sit and listen to me talk, So having topics that are relatable to everyone in the room was kind of their goal. And I found that to be successful.
Nice. Do you ever herp for indigos? Have you ever done any herping specifically for them?
Only recently. Yeah. And so I've had sort of a loose goal in the last 5 years to, start finding Drymarchon in the wild. And so I've had some success with that. Most recently, it wasn't even a herp trip, but I was in Belize with my family celebrating our my 20th wedding anniversary along with some friends, and I was able to find a baby blacktail crebo, which was just an awesome highlight for me. And so yeah, it's been pretty cool. But it's, obviously we don't have any of those things in California, so being able to get on a plane with the sole focus of finding one species, and then having it bear fruit is pretty cool. So
Wow. What? So did you specifically go out to find that animal and you found it?
yes and no. I mean, it wasn't a herp trip, right? It was a family trip, and so
Sure.
I'm not going to be out say, oh, I'll see you guys later on. I'm going to go traipse around the jungle for a while. It wasn't really that, but that looked like in Belize was, you know, um, indigos can be active early in the morning, and so, particularly in tropical climates. A lot of what you hear is that they're going to be active from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. kind of a thing. So when everyone else was sleeping, we were on an island, and so I'd get the golf cart, which we had, and just road cruise the dirt roads at dawn. Thinking, kind of idly hoping. And the research that I'd done prior was that there weren't any crebos on the island. We were this ambergris Cay, and right before I left to go out there, I heard from wildlife rescue there saying that yeah, they do in fact have them on the island. And so I was like, well, I probably won't see one. I'm not even really herping. I'm just going to be, driving around on my golf cart at dawn on these dirt roads where they have these big trucks driving and just crushing animals and whatever. And, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get a vine snake or maybe a baby boa or something crossing the road. But sure enough, I only found 2 live snakes. And the first one was a hatchling speckled racer, which was really cool. And the second one was a hatchling blacktail crebo. So I was
Wow.
pretty stoked. I mean, it wasn't the purpose of the trip. It wasn't even necessarily the target. I was just hoping to see whatever might be out, and I got lucky.
That's so cool. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, it was a good moment.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you.
That's impressive. That must have been super awesome. Oh, and are they still readily collected there?
I mean, Belize is probably one of the better places to go to find them in the wild, and that they're relatively common. However, you can't export them out of Belize anymore.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, obviously I didn't keep the one that I found. It wouldn't be legal. So they're somewhat regularly exported out of Nicaragua,
Hmm.
because Nicaragua is still open to exporting wild caught animals. And so you'll occasionally get shipments coming in from Nicaragua with some wild caught Drymarchon unicolor crebos and blacktail crebos. And so you'll see that pop up now and again. But yeah,
Do you
pretty
ever
cool.
bring in like wild caught or captive hatched or whatever animals to strengthen your bloodlines?
Not really. It's not really necessary. By now, I have enough captive animals across all the 6 subspecies that it's not really needed. If I come across one that's wild caught and it's been imported into the U.S. and I like the look and it would be a good, you know, I'm at a time when I need some genetic strength. I've done it before, where I bought something kind of unique looking coming in from a wild caught source, but in general, it's trickier. Importing wild Drymarchon is a little trickier. They tend to have parasites. They tend to be dehydrated. They can often be in rough shape, and it's a lot of work to get them established, particularly to a point where they're going to someday breed for you.
Hmm.
So I avoid it in general. I'd much rather do the captive bred route.
Yeah, I don't blame you. So I kind of want to get into husbandry
Mhm.
and just overall care. What do you recommend for temperatures? Like, do you recommend people keep them ambient?
Right. So the most important thing, if you're going to try to keep Drymarchon, and this is really the same for any of the 6 major subspecies, is temperature. They don't tolerate heat. And it's kind of counterintuitive to think because they come from climates that can get very hot, Florida, Texas, Latin America. But they don't really tolerate a lot of heat. They have to be able to get away from heat. So that being said, the fastest way to kill your animal and to screw it up is to have it be too hot and not give them a method to be able to escape the heat. So that's critical. That's number one. Now, from there are different methods, temperature-wise, to take care of your animals. And I'm not the kind of guy who's going to say my way's the best. There are a lot of people that set up their Drymarchon differently with great success. So some people set them up with just ambient. And if your ambient temperature is somewhere in that 76 to 82 degree area, if your snake room is that temperature in a stable way, I would say don't put any external heat on. They're happy at ambient. That's cool. Now, that being said, there are some people who, will still provide a heat source, a basking spot or something, way off in a corner. And they'll say the snakes do utilize that, go for it. But the main thing is that the bulk of their time needs to be spent in the upper 70s. And if you're going to provide some kind of heat off in a corner, that's fine, as long as they have a method to escape it and that they can spend their time in the mid to upper 70s and just be able to chill like that. I've never been one to provide that, a basking spot, but there are people do with success. So I don't want to tell you that it's wrong, but what I do want to tell you is wrong is not give them a cool side. So what I'll also say when people ask me this question, I'll ask them, what's the ambient temperature in your snake room? And if they say, well, it's 68, 72 degrees, I said, then yeah, you should put some heat off in a corner and, set the heat on a thermostat. Don't let it get it anywhere close to the mid 80s. If you can keep it in the low 80s, if your temp range from the cool side to the hot side is, somewhere between 72 on the cool side and 82 on the hot side, your snake will be happy. So the question being, should you provide external heat? My answer would be it really depends on the ambient in your snake room. If your ambient is, in the upper 70s, 78, 80 degrees, something like that, don't put on any heat. The snakes will be happy. If your ambient is colder, put on a little bit of heat, keep it on a thermostat, and provide that gradient. So, some people provide the temp gradient. Some people just keep them ambient. It can work either way. The only real steadfast rule is don't let them get too hot without an escape route.
In the wild, they're like in Florida, the eastern indigos are going to go for tortoise burrows, right?
Correct.
So I would have to imagine that it's quite cool down there. Right.
And so, and Drymarchon in general are most active in the winter, and that's their breeding season. So you'll see the big males out cruising around looking for females in November and December, and it might be 50, 60 degrees out and they're surface active and they're crawling around, and in the heat of the summer, we don't really know exactly what they do, but they can go down in the tortoise burrows, but they'll also go down into the swamps where they can stay cooler and wetter, in the swampy areas and get away from the sandhills a little bit. So, they're not tolerant of just sitting out in a lot of heat. They're not into that. They're generally more active when it's cooler in the wild.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on my house. Being in Florida during the day, my house is usually 78, 79 degrees. Mm-hmm. And then, at night we run the AC because we want to be able to sleep peacefully, and It goes down to maybe 72. Mm-hmm. So would that be good conditions for keeping an indigo ambient?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. I would just keep it ambient like that. And ultimately, you try something, watch your animal, see what it does, see how it acts, see how it eats, and see if it, it seems happy and makes sense and continue it. But it sounds like in your setup, it would be pretty ideal for just leaving it ambient temp.
Okay. And okay, so you have your baby, you keep it in like a small tub to make sure it gets established with feeding. And then gradually, I'm assuming you'd probably step up tub sizes, right?
Correct.
And just, as the animal grows, step up the tub sizes until that switch flips and they get that confidence where then they want to know what you're doing in the area and, why are you here? And then is that the time when you can move them to their enclosure or whatever they're going to be inhabiting for probably the remainder of their time in your care?
Yeah, I think so. I've always subscribed to the philosophy that the size of your cage should be proportional to the size of your snake, and that you're not putting a hatchling in a 6-foot long cage. I've never tried it, so I don't necessarily want to, badmouth people that do. The argument is that a little tiny small snake in a big gigantic enclosure can stress out and get lost. But people do it with success. So, teach their own. But I generally stick with the idea that as they age and as they get bigger, then I bump up their cage sizes. So, they'll start off in a shoebox tub, when they're little hatchlings. And then for the ones that I keep, I'll eventually move them up to 28 quart and then the 41 quart tubs. And then, until they get all the way till they're adult enclosures. So from hatching to adulthood, I might have it in, 4 different size cages along the way.
And how quickly do they grow? Like, like if I were to get one and I'm keeping it in tubs, like how quickly is it going to go from tubs to like a 4x2 enclosure?
Right. So like anything, I mean, I don't mean for this to be an evasive answer, but like anything, it depends on your feeding regimen and it depends on your husbandry. There's a big difference in growth rate if you're keeping your animal at 78 degrees or, at 80 degrees as opposed to 76, and if you're feeding every 7 days or every 5 days, it makes a difference. And obviously, genetics and lineage can affect growth rates too. But all that being said, in general, they grow pretty quickly. I'm more of one of the philosophy that I would rather slow grow my snakes. I'm not about the power feeding and fast growth rates. I think it's better for the snake to, take its time getting older. But that being said, to get a snake up to say 4x2 size, that might be 2 years. It might be 3 years, somewhere along that line. There are some people that are pretty obsessed with, weight and size and, look at my snake, it's 1 year old and it's this size and this weight. And to me, it's not really relevant. I prefer to slow grow my stuff.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea to know whether or not I have space for them long term once I get my building compared to, because like space is definitely like what do you recommend somebody keep a large, a full grown adult male indigo in? What would be the ideal enclosure size?
Yeah, I mean the absolute minimum is a 4x2, but some indigos are bigger than others. Some of the red Mexican indigos, for example, are quite a bit smaller than some of the others. Most people go the 6x2 route. Some people go the 8x2. I don't know that all that's completely necessary, but you're usually somewhere minimum 4x2, but average kind of more like a 6x2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how active are they? Is it important for them to get out and stretch their legs?
Yeah, and they're smart snakes. And what you'll find is that if you put them in a 6x2, they'll hide a lot like any other snake, but they'll come out and they want to see what you're doing, and you're in there working in your snake room and they'll come out and they'll put their face up to the glass and they'll watch what's going on. And they're very visual. They're very inquisitive. And they're pretty intelligent, and you can almost see them thinking. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I saw this video of one at a zoo, and they had one of those like dog treat enrichment things, and they put a little like button quail or something in one of the things, and it found the feeder and then slid the door open to be able to get the feeder out like a dog would.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, I've seen that video. It's they're pretty cool. People throw around the word intelligence a lot with respect to reptiles. And so that's certainly one thing to look at with that. But one of the things that I talk about with intelligence of indigos is that they figure things out very quickly. And one of those is you're hard pressed to find a snake with a more aggressive feeding response. I mean, these things, it obviously varies by individual, but you open their enclosure, they come out with their mouth open and they want to hammer and kill anything that comes near them. But as soon as you get them in your hands, they stop, and because they know better, and they figure it out. I've had snakes before where it doesn't matter. They're going to bite anything that feels fleshy, and they don't care what it is, and they don't care what it smells like, but indigos figure it out really quickly. They've got that strong feeding response, but as soon as you put them in your hands, they turn it off. They know better. They know who you are. They know they're not being fed. And then they hang out they hang out and interact with you. And so to me, when you talk about what kind of barometer we're using to measure intelligence, that's a big one when you're talking about reptiles. Do they know what's going on around them? Do they know when they're being fed and when they're not being fed, and how quickly can they figure it out? And it's a pretty cool thing to be able to interact with an indigo, a hungry indigo. And, you see that aggression that it has towards any kind of prey or something coming into its habitat. But then you see how quickly they turn it off, when they get in your hands, and they can pick it up and turn around and hand it to a kid and it would be fine. Whereas 30 seconds earlier, it's trying to rip your face off.
Wow. Damn, if you're not trying to sell me on them, you're doing a terrible job.
Well, I gotta tell you, you say things like that, and sometimes people get turned off, and other people, their eyes get big, and I gotta have one of those. But I've had snakes that will literally lunge out of their cage, land on the floor, and chase me across the room. I've had there's a video on my YouTube somewhere of one of my yellowtail crebos doing that this decade ago. And he would chase me across the room, and I'd have a rat on the end of my tongs, and I'm just trying to get the rat in the snake's mouth before the mouth gets in me, And once he grabs onto the rat, I pick it up, put it back in the cage. But that same snake, that what I'll usually use as a cage hook, I'll go in, I'll hook the snake, I'll get a coil in my hand, and it just stops.
Wow.
So you see those polar opposite extremes of that really aggressive feeding response, but at the same time, of how gentle they can be.
It's like the polar opposite of Antaresia. They'll just continuously try to eat your hand.
Yeah. And I mean, we've all seen snakes like that, right? I mean, some of the meanest snakes I had were Taiwan beauty snakes. They would just bite everything, and it didn't matter if your fingers were near them, they were going to bite it. It didn't matter how calm they were.
Yeah. Is that one of the big appeals for you? Is that level of intelligence? I mean, how else would you describe it? I mean, I feel like that's right. Just intelligence. The fact that they're feeling the warmth of your skin, or they smell you, and they just know that it's not time to feed.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't like to disparage anyone else's interests or passions, to each their own. I'm not the ball python kind of guy. They're gorgeous, they're cool, but I need something that I'm going to interact with more, and to have something that's more active, to have something that's more inquisitive, to have something that's more aware of what's around it. That's what appeals to me. That's what does it for me. And so snakes like indigos, match that to a T. And so, it's not for everybody. Some people don't want to get lunged at, when they open an enclosure, and they would rather just go in and pick up their ball python, and that's cool. But they're not for everybody, but for some people, be careful. It's an addiction.
Yeah, I know. I could imagine. Jeez.
Right.
So, all you feed is chicks and rodents. Do you do any organ meats or anything like that? I know you said you avoid the fish.
I mean, I use fish still. It's just in what proportions, So an average meal will be a rodent and a chick, but I'll still mix in other stuff. So I'll still give fish. I've experimented a little bit with doing some of the prepackaged, sausage links, the Reptile links and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of being able to diversify the prey as much as you can, especially when you're talking about a species that in the wild eats so many different things. I'm a big proponent of just trying to match what they're getting in the wild. That being said, there's an accessibility issue, and rodents and chicks are just so easy to obtain and easy to keep frozen and easy to feed. But that being said, I do try to mix in whatever else I can. So younger animals, I'll buy chicken hearts from the Asian market. I'll buy frog legs from the Asian market. They absolutely love those. And I don't really do it regularly because it's not really accessible for me. But, when I'm out field herping, if I see a freshly hit snake in the road or something like that, I'll take it home. I'll freeze it for a couple months, make sure there's all the parasites are gone. And when you offer a snake to an indigo, you quickly learn that rodents are not the top of their preference list, that especially with Eastern indigos, snakes make up a gigantic part of their diet in the wild, and they absolutely love them. And so you put in a snake in there, and they think about it at first, and they check it out, and you can see them thinking because it's not something they're used to feeding on. But they love them, and then they go absolutely berserk. Quick story: I had one of my first clutches of Eastern indigos that I ever got many, many years ago. I had a baby that just would not eat. I was trying everything. I was trying fish. I was trying birds. I was trying frogs. I was trying toads. I tried literally everything. I couldn't get the dang thing to eat. And I was over at an importer near my house, and I was buying house geckos for my baby Musarana. And the guy had just imported from Florida or whatever, those guys, a ribbon snake that was gravid and had just dumped a bunch of babies. I said, "Hey, how much for those baby, ribbon snakes?" He said, "I just take $5 each, whatever." So I grabbed one and I brought it home and I threw it in the enclosure with this indigo snake that is now probably 4 months old and has never had a single meal and turned its nose up at everything. I put in a live baby ribbon snake. It's the only time I fed a live snake to my indigos. And I'm telling you, this snake went berserk. It started huffing. They huff and they breathe heavy, and it started chasing the ribbon snake around the cage, just chasing it around immediately within seconds. And that was a moment for me where you quickly learn that, we all want to feed our snakes rodents, but that's not generally what they're looking for. And it's in a lot of ways, it's lowest on their preference list and maybe lowest on what's good for them nutritionally. So it's a reminder that, I try to vary the diet as much as I can.
Have you ever thought about working with like a local ball python breeder or something that gets a bunch of normals that they don't want or need, or, that are going to be so cheap that they might go to a house that's not going to give them, proper care? Like, have you ever thought about utilizing kind of, I hate to say it, but like byproducts from, from morph breeding for feeders?
Yeah. Well, snakes, people will produce animals with kinks or stillborn or whatever else. I generally avoid it. And the reason is, to be honest, I will sometimes trust the cleanliness and the health of a wild snake more than a captive snake sometimes.
Really?
You sit in on some of these presentations at Colubrid Fest, and you listen to some of these podcasts about Cryptosporidium and some other stuff. Mm-hmm. And man, I don't trust other people's collections, to be honest with you. And I don't blame you. And I'm much more comfortable giving my snake a road-killed snake, wild snake that I've frozen for a while, than giving it a snake that's been sitting in someone's collection.
Yeah.
I have to protect the health of my animals in my collection, and it's not anywhere near worth the risk.
Do you ever get animals that are kinked or have an issue and you utilize those as a feeder?
It happens at times. I generally don't. It's every once in a while I'll get a kink or a stillborn stuff. I also, have breed some local king snakes just for fun and whatever. And if I get a stillborn one of those or something like that, I throw it in the freezer and that'll get utilized if I know that it's clean. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. How do you handle biosecurity? Like with a collection that, the value that's in your collection is enormous, crazy. So how do you make sure that, you don't bring in any of these potential issues?
Well, I mean, the way you phrase the question, the first thing is quarantine. That you need to be able to quarantine, and you have to also become educated about what's out there and how to protect against it and how to screen against it. And so I quarantine anything that's new that's coming in. It doesn't come near my collection, and I'll run fecals on them to test against the things that I'm particularly worried about. And some of these things, like cryptosporidium, for example, it's pretty easy to get false negatives when you're talking about the fecals that you run. So you have to do multiple lab tests over several months before you can really have some level of reasonable confidence that it's a clean animal and bring into your collection. So, quarantine procedure is a big one. And then just cleanliness is another big one too. And can be a challenge when you're talking about Drymarchon. So, it's obviously cleaning the cages like we all need to do, but it's also being aware and educated about what chemicals you need to be using when you are cleaning your cages and what chemicals kill what problems, So you talk about something like cryptosporidium, just using bleach or soap isn't going to do it. So you have to tailor what you're doing around protecting your animals. So I use hydrogen peroxide at 12% concentration on the hydrogen peroxide on when I'm cleaning all the tubs, and that's specifically to guard against these things that I'm scared of, right? And so using hydrogen peroxide is a big deal. And then do your research, becoming educated about what do you need to do to kill off some of these things. And so contact time is a big deal. So you're not just rinsing it, spraying it on your tub and then rinsing it 10 seconds later. You need 20 minutes of contact time and all that. And then UV rays from the sun. I'll leave some of my tubs out in the sun for a day and let them really cook to make sure everything gets killed off. So, it's something that you have to be mindful of, is making sure that you're not bringing in any kind of pathogens into your collection and preventing anything from not only coming in, but from spreading and whatever else. So it's something to be mindful of for sure, particularly if you have a lot of animals.
So walk me through your quarantine. Like how far, like if let's say you brought in a new animal, you went and picked one up, on Wednesday or Tuesday,
right.
And where is it going? How long is it going to be there? And then I would like to get an idea of your fecal protocols too, if you're doing them yourself but we can get into that later. So you get a brand new animal. How far away is your quarantine?
Well, so at my partner's house, we have a trailer. That we have set up where we have a couple racks down there. And so they don't come in contact with anything in the collection, right? So they'll be down there. And, really the thing that you worry about the most is cryptosporidium. So I test against that. And so I don't do it myself. It has to be done with a PCR test where you're getting a look at the spores in the fecals. And the thing about cryptosporidium is that they're not shedding spores continuously. It goes in cycles. So you might send in a clean fecal sample on an infected animal, and you just don't know because the spores aren't showing up in that same fecal. So with that being said, you have to become educated. You have to learn how all this stuff works. And so I like to get at least 3 clean fecals back over the course of multiple months before I really feel comfortable with that. And, it's, I don't know. I think some people kind of view it as a jerk maneuver, but sometimes when I buy snakes, I'll tell people, I'll say, look, just so you know, I'm going to be running, fecal exams through quarantine. And if something pops up, I would hope that you take care of me with this, and it's happened. And I've had to have those uncomfortable conversations with people. And sometimes people are receptive to it. Sometimes they're not. But, I prefer to just be upfront with people and just say, look, your animal's not going to get put into my collection. It's going to be in quarantine, and I'm going to do a bunch of tests on it. And it's no reflection on you. It's no reflection on your animals. It's just what I do. And, and if God forbid something does pop up, we're going to have that conversation.
How do you handle that? Like how do you navigate that uncomfortable conversation of finding out that you purchased an animal that's positive for crypto?
Well, I try to navigate it by having a conversation in advance, and just saying like this is what I'm going to do, but it doesn't always go that way. I'll share a story. I just bought a couple of adult indigos from a guy, and I went and checked them out personally. They're visibly looking great, all good. But when in quarantine, they tested positive, and now the guy, he won't return any of my calls or texts. So
Wow.
it's it happens, and you can only take it as far as you're willing to take it. But you have to protect your animals first and foremost.
Jeez. Yeah. What's that guy's name? No.
Yeah. I get it, but I'm also not that guy either. So
no, I know. I was totally kidding.
I know you are, but he's gonna have to live with himself, and that's his problem.
Yeah, boy, that is so sad. Like that you. I mean, I get it. Like but man, if you're selling animals to somebody, you'd think that you'd want to make sure they're taken care of.
Well, cryptosporidium is a tough one, and this is why I have to mitigate my anger at a situation like this, because you can have a snake that's infected and it can be completely asymptomatic, and unless you're running fecals, you have absolutely no way to know that your animal's compromised. So I don't want to say that these people are deliberately selling infected animals with their knowledge. That's just not realistic. I went and looked at them in person. They look great. But it's obviously not something I can have be part of my collection. So, that's the tough part, is that most people, they know to watch if your snake's getting skinny or if it's regurgitating or, things like that. But, it might be visibly fine unless you're going to be doing some lab work. You don't know. You don't know that your animal's sick. So, and that's what scares the hell out of you too, as a breeder with a big collection. Scares the hell out of you because people don't know. People don't know. And nor should they really necessarily be expected to know, because they might have asymptomatic animals.
What do you do with those animals now?
Well, that's the tough thing too, is that, there are, again, I'm not going to do names or anything, but there are organizations that knowingly have, crypto in their collections, but they isolate them, so put them in their own room, whether it's all positives in a room. And what you'll find too is, when you do your research, is that you can have, infected animals that are completely asymptomatic and can live a long and healthy life if you're taking care of them. And if their husbandry is proper, and if you're not adding any stressors that might damage their immune system. So these little snakes can live long and happy lives. So being able to put them in an environment where they're happy and healthy, but away from everything else, that's a way to go. Otherwise, you're talking about euthanasia or returning the snake to the person if they're going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's depressing.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. But, I feel like there are conversations that need to be had, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a big presentation at Colubrid Fest on biosecurity of collection. John Rice from Fathom Hogs did that. And boy, he's super obsessive over making sure everything in his collection's clean. And, and then there was another presentation about, conditions that you need to protect your animals against. And, it's scary stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like it's part of all of our responsibility to become educated about it.
Is your quarantine slightly more stressful than like normal existence, to try to see if you could make the animal symptomatic, to see if you could get that positive, if there's going to be one, if that crypto is dormant?
No. I mean, it's if it's dormant, it's going to pop up eventually over the course of multiple fecals. So, I'm not intentionally increasing stress levels, to try to get it to manifest itself. It's more just knowing that I need to do multiple fecals over an extended period of time.
Mm. Being where you're at in California, do you guys have any pentastomes or anything like that? Do you guys have to worry about that?
This is something that I'm just learning about. In my knowledge, they're not really in wild populations around Southern California. But I can't pretend to be an expert.
Yeah, it scares me.
Sure.
Pentastomes terrify me because I'm in Florida, and I guess we have pentastomes here, and
your water snakes and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen images of them coming out of black racers' mouths, and yeah, it's another terrifying thing. And then Dr. Loafman told me that they're in the anoles, and I used to have a rhino iguana, and I am now almost 100% convinced that he had pentastomes, and it was probably from eating anoles.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's this kind of what I say. It's important that we all become educated about how all this stuff works.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of scary stuff out there.
Right. That's right.
So you have your animal. They've moved into their larger enclosure. Mm-hmm. What age do you normally breed your animals at, your Drymarchon?
In general, like I said, I like to slow grow things, but in general, I'm looking at sexual maturity somewhere between 3 and 5 years of age. It's not the real quick turnaround that you get on some of the other hognoses and other colubrids where you're breeding them at 2 years or, 3 years, is doable, but it can tend to be a little early. I usually shoot for 4 or 5 years of age. And that being said, it's a little bit more about size than it is about age. You kind of want to have both things lined up. There's a period of time when your holdback starts getting the adult girth. And it's a hard thing to quantify, but you're somewhere around 5-6 feet in length. And there's a point where they stop sort of getting long and skinny, and they just start gaining that muscle mass, that indigo muscle mass. And then that's generally when I start thinking about, okay, you're about ready to breed here.
And how are you getting them ready to breed? Do you cycle their food? Do you cycle temperatures? What are the triggers that you utilize?
So they're winter breeders, right? And so I'm generally pairing now. In fact, that's literally what I'm doing this weekend. So I'll lower the temperatures a bit during the day, and I'll also allow a little bit of a night drop. I have a window in my snake room, so they're getting that decreased light cycle, and that's generally enough to get them triggered and going. I don't do any kind of water cycling that some of colubrids need, but generally around November, December is when they're going to want to be locking up. So I might decrease the temperature in my garage, down to the mid 60s, but I'll also let it fluctuate some. Here in Southern California, we're still getting warm days, throughout the winter and cool days throughout the winter. And so I'm allowing for some fluctuation, but overall the average temperatures will drop 8 or 10 degrees during the day, and they'll drop even more a little bit at night. And I let that kind of happen. And then they'll breed cold. They'll breed in the winter. They'll breed cold. There was a period of time where I was experimenting with breeding my Eastern Indigos outside during the winter. And I was putting racks in my backyard, and I covered them up with a tarp, the entire rack, and I put a thermostat in there, and I set the thermostat to like 60 degrees or something so they didn't get too cold. But then I just let it do whatever it was going to do, and there was one particular case I remember where it was 50 degrees, and I paired my Easterns up, and they locked up immediately, and they stayed locked for over 24 hours. So Easterns in particular, I think you can let them get even colder, and they'll breed when it's cold.
Wow. So what are your temps precisely? So if you're going from, your normal ambient, let's, 76 to 80, what are you going down to? And are you stopping feeding?
Temperature wise, it's about a 10-degree drop. So I'll be more in the upper 60s,
Wow.
and let that fluctuate up into the low 70s a little bit, and it'll hang out about that area. And that's when the snakes are breeding. As far as food goes, it really depends on the individual. I have some individuals that shut off all summer. I'm sorry, I
Mm.
said that wrong. Shut off all winter. And I have others that will eat throughout the entire time. But that being said, I'm going to offer smaller meals less frequently. Um, and if they want to eat, I'll feed them. And if they don't want to eat, I don't worry about it. And, come February, I start warming everything back up and everything starts feeding again and we're all good. But, there is definitely variability between individuals on their desire to eat when it's cold out. Easterns in general just always want to eat, and they'll be eating throughout the winter too. So, whereas I might give, a medium rat and a chick in the summertime, in the winter, I might be, one or two chicks, or maybe a jumbo mouse or something like that. But I don't know. I try not to. I don't really overanalyze it too much. If they're hungry and they want to eat, I feed them.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to eat, I don't worry about it. They're cool enough where they're not going to starve and start getting skinny. They know what they're doing. If they're healthy snakes, they'll eat when they need to.
That's wild that they can still digest food at such low temperatures.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, they can do it, and their metabolism's still fast. They're still pooping out their food 2 days later.
Yeah. I don't understand how that works. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
It's kind of counterintuitive for a cold-blooded animal, but that's what happens.
God, did that scare you in the beginning? Did it feel weird doing that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a process. You learn. You have your concerns, and then you try something. You watch. You observe. You draw conclusions on what you've observed, and you let it affect your husbandry down the line. And so, they looked hungry. So I threw a chicken and rat in front of them and they ate it, and okay. And they pooped 2 days later. Okay. It's 65 degrees and you're still eating. Oh, all right. And yeah, I mean, in my mind, if they want to eat and they're passing good, clean, clear fecals, let them do it.
Man, I like, before coming into this conversation, I was thinking, like, how could I keep an animal that eats so frequently at ambient temperatures in my house, with 78 during the day and 72 at night. And now, like, I feel very confident that they would be a very healthy animal.
Oh yeah. They'll love it. They'll love it. Yeah. It sounds like the temp setup of your house is pretty ideal for them.
Wow. And at winter, it might go down to 68, 67 at night, but it still rises during the day. It seems like that would be fine.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. A night drop into the 60s is not a problem at all.
Kind of going off topic from the Drymarchon, you had mentioned water cycling. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I'm absolutely not an expert with that, but there are some colubrids where breeding can be triggered by humid season versus dry season. And, we're talking about, tropical colubrid species. So, tiger rat snakes, bird eating snakes, would fall kind of in that category. And that there are people that will trigger breeding by inducing a dry cycle, a dry season, and then inducing a wet season by misting heavily in one part of the year and letting them dry out a bit more in another part of the year. It's not something I do a ton of.
Okay. Interesting. What is your ideal humidity for your animals? Do you ever have shedding issues with do you have to humidify the room that they're in?
It's a struggle. I don't humidify the room that I'm in. That's to me in Southern California. I mean, that's like sticking your finger in the hole in a dam. It's a tough thing because we're generally dry all the time. But what I'll do is I'll put in a humid hide box in every enclosure. And so there's damp moss in there. And so while I do have, dry and drier times of year, there are some times when I have some shedding issues. But in general, I like to offer the snakes humid choices in their cage. So most of their cage is dry. And that helps with cleanliness. That helps with that messy fecals. But I also provide a humid option. So every cage has a Tupperware filled with damp moss, and the snakes will use it, and they figure it out, and they can manage their shedding cycles and all that, like that. So I don't humidify my room. It's just too much of a challenge with the setup that I have. But I do offer that humid hide box in every enclosure, including the babies. They have little humid hides as well.
Okay. And so is that just like sphagnum in there?
Correct.
Just moist?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And do they ever poop in the box?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's a little bit more frustrating because it's harder to find and it clumps up and whatever. But yeah, that's part of what you need to do when you're cleaning is making sure you're checking the hides.
Yeah, it's too bad you can't train them to just go inside the box.
If you could do it for any snake, I think indigos would probably be the most trainable. But I haven't gone down that road. Yeah.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, it would probably take some work. Be like, you poop in there, you get a quail.
That's right. That's right. Some of them could probably figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they could. Okay, so you've cooled them, you've gotten locks. So now. Like you've got gravid females. Mm-hmm. How long until you get eggs, and then what temperature do you incubate the eggs at?
So most of my locks happen in late November, early December, and then I start getting eggs. It's funny. I've just recently started kind of paying attention to that data. That I'll write down if I see a visual lock, I write down the date, and then I write down. When they lay their clutches, and man, it's all over the map. I mean, it can be really variable. I can get clutches as early as late February, and I can get them as late as mid-May. Wow. And they're all locking up in the same time window in late November and early December. So I haven't necessarily figured that out yet. But on average, they're generally locking up late November, and they're laying their eggs in, I'd say, early to mid-April is generally the thing. Incubation. Incubation is one that you do if you're an aspiring Drymarchon breeder that you do have to kind of pay attention to. So I don't know too much about python incubation, but I know with other colubrids, sort of the standard temperature for most colubrids is 80, 82 degrees. With Drymarchon, you want to be cooler than that. And I don't understand the science behind it, but this is what works. That if you're incubating them too hot, they will develop spinal kinks or they'll be stillborn, and that's a problem. So I incubate at 76 degrees, and I put them in an incubator. I pin it exactly at 76 degrees, and I keep it that way. There are people that let it increase a little bit in temperature right before they hatch. I don't do that. I keep it right at 76, and it works really well. The amount of kinks that you have, the amount of stillborn animals that you have goes way down if you have a cooler incubation temperature. So that's critical. The other part of it as well, and people ask me, and unfortunately I'm not detail-oriented enough that I'm actually taking down data, but they want it drier. Indigo snakes don't tolerate as much moisture and humidity in the egg box as other species do. And so for me, it's more of a feel thing. I've never actually measured the humidity levels, but I would rather not have any moisture touching the egg. So some people use that Sims method where they put them on top of a little crate. What I do is I take vermiculite and I put it through the bottom of the egg box. I'll get it wet, but not nearly as wet as I would other colubrids. And then I put another 2 inches of completely dry vermiculite on top of that. And then I let the eggs sit there. Drier than you think. What I was told when I was first getting started breeding Hondurans and so forth, that for a good way to sort of informally measure the amount of moisture you want in your vermiculite is to soak your vermiculite and then grab handfuls of it and wring it out with your hands and squeeze out as much water as you can and then put it in your egg box. And that's how much moisture you need. That's way too wet for an indigo. It works great on king snakes and milk snakes and whatever. It's way too wet for an indigo. So it's drier than normal. I put the egg box in my incubator. And then what I would rather do is have humidity ambient in the incubator than inside the egg box. And so I allow ventilation in the egg boxes, which a lot of people don't do because they want to keep the humidity inside the egg box. I want the airflow. And so I'll leave a tub of water in my incubator to have ambient humidity in the incubator. And that might be 90-95% humidity in the incubator, while inside the egg box is still relatively dry compared to other clutches you might be setting up. So I like the airflow. I like the lower temperatures. And I like, in general, inside the egg box to be drier than you would other colubrid species. And I think the airflow is another important component too. And one thing that I've noticed through trial and error over the years is that I like to allow a lot of space inside of the egg box. And so I'll use totes rather than little deli cups or containers for the egg boxes. And I like to have some space between the egg and the lid. And I want to have a lot of air in there. And one thing that I did notice early on when I was breeding indigos is that if you don't leave a whole lot of space and you don't allow a lot of airflow, your babies will come out kinked and they'll come out messed up. So you want the extra air. Drymarchon eggs will breathe. They need the air. It's important. So those three things are kind of all critical. You want the airflow. You want lower temperatures than normal. You want drier egg boxes than normal. Keep the humidity ambient high, but the egg itself shouldn't be too wet. I've had it before where if my substrate, the vermiculite, is too wet, then the egg actually absorbs some of that moisture and the egg will swell. And sometimes they'll create these bulges in the egg. And I've even had it happen before where the bulges become so extreme that the egg actually bursts because it's taken on too much moisture. So if you try to incubate a Drymarchon egg like you would a corn snake, it's not going to work. You know, you want colder, you want drier, and you want more air.
Man, that's wild.
Yeah.
So they're like sponges.
Yeah, they can be like that. I had to learn that the hard way, but yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, drier.
Wow. And how long is that incubation period?
So because you're going colder, your incubation period is extending. So my average is generally about 105 to 110 days. You know,
wow.
Whereas, the king snakes you do at 82 degrees, they're hatching in 60 days. So this is double that. And I've had some clutches go over 130 days.
Holy crap.
At 76 degrees. So, and again, I can't figure out the reasons why necessarily. It's not like clockwork. I can do everything exactly the same. And some clutches will hatch at 95 days and other clutches will hatch at 130 days. So it's somewhere in that range. On average, we're about 105, 110 days, but it could vary. And man, I'd love to figure it out someday. And I haven't yet on why that happens, why some just hatch early and some don't. But anyway, that's about what you're looking at.
And that'll be with the same subspecies or species.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts. And when are they laying about again?
So they're laying in April, generally, March to May, somewhere April.
So they might not be hatching out until like August?
Correct. Yeah. Most of my eggs hatch in July and August. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Man, that's like a whole different ball game.
Yeah, it's a long process, right? Because you think about it, and I mean, I still have baby snakes from 2025 that are not established yet, and I'm still working on getting them feeding. And I'm already pairing things up, and they're locking up for next season. So it's constant. There's always something to be working on. It's when you're breeding them, you're monitoring the breeding to make sure there's no aggression. You're watching all that. Then you're collecting the eggs, and then you're putting them in the incubator, and then you have the long wait. Then you get a whole bumper crop of babies, and you're getting all those established. And by the time you finally feel like you're getting some progress done on the babies, it's time to start pairing again for the next year.
Now, does that keep you excited, or do you sometimes feel burnt out with that constant?
Listen, I'm not going to lie. It's a grind sometimes, but that being said, I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it,
Yeah.
Like anything else, it can be a grind. Nobody wants to go out there and be cleaning poop all the time and doing all that. And, but I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it.
Yeah. Yeah. God bless, man. 20 years of that.
Right. Right.
Oh man. Was it a lot of trial and error in the beginning?
Yeah. I mean, in particular with the incubation, that took some time, and sooner or later you come across, all kinds of different scenarios that you have to learn with, I bring this up not to say that it's a common problem, but one of the things that will pop up sometimes is that sometimes you get males that are aggressive towards the females in breeding. And, remember these, they eat other snakes, and, it doesn't happen a lot, but it's, something else that you have to learn. You get a female that gets cut up and she's got lacerations, and then you have to be doing the sutures and all that. And, sooner or later you come across all these different scenarios that you have to prepare for.
Have you ever had like full blown cannibalism?
They've tried, but I know to watch. I fortunately have not had one kill a mate, but they've come close. I had there are a couple different things to arise when you're talking about aggression towards, from between during courtship. And, I don't know, I don't even know if pythons do this at all, but it's not uncommon with colubrids for a male to bite the female's neck during breeding as part of the courtship process. And in general, it's totally benign and it doesn't matter. It's part of the process. It doesn't cause any damage. But indigos have such strong jaws and such sharp teeth. And even though they have these big, thick scales, indigo skin under and in between the scales is fairly supple. And lacerations are really pretty common. So even if it's not a feeding thing, if it's just biting during courtship, it can cause a lot of damage, and the females can get cut up pretty badly. So that's something that you have to watch for. And then every once in a while, I get a male who's just off his damn rocker, and he keeps trying to eat all the females. And I have one yellowtail in particular right now who's named Ed, who's my biggest and probably prettiest by far yellowtail. And I would love to get his genetics passed down. But man, he just keeps trying to eat everybody. It doesn't matter. I'll cool it down to 60 degrees, and he's out there trying to eat the females. And he searches out their head, and he finds the head, and he'll clamp onto the head and start trying to swallow. And I'm separating him and doing all that. And, you got to keep your animals safe, but you also want to breed them. And, so Ed's been on a timeout lately. I got to figure out some different methods to try, but, I don't want to say that to dissuade anyone from breeding Drymarchon, because it is abnormal. It's, 1 or 2% of all my, males will be doing something like that. But, it happens. It happens.
But you cannot just put them together in a tub and just slide it shut.
No. But that being said, like, I know my animals, so there are some that I trust completely. I've had them for years. They've bred for years. I put them in, I take them out 2 days later, things are great. There are others I know I got to watch, right? I have to monitor. Yeah.
Friggin' Ed, man.
Yeah. He's nuts. He's nuts. He's a legit 8 feet. He's bright yellow. He's got this really awesome tiger banding throughout his whole body. I would love to be able to breed him, but I don't know. I gotta think of something new to try with him this year.
Damn, Ed. Jeez, dude. Chill out.
Right.
Man. Well, okay. So you've got the eggs, you've successfully incubated them. Now you've got the babies.
Right.
How long do you wait out the babies before you start doing feeding trials?
I let them shed. As soon as they shed, I start getting to work.
And how long does that normally take?
It's about a week, 1 to 2 weeks.
Wow.
1 to 2 weeks they'll shed. For a period of time I was breeding hognoses, and some of them hatched and they were already in the blue and they were shedding 2 days after hatching. Indigos, it's generally about 1 to 2 weeks before they shed, and then I'll start the feeding trials. I don't really do it before they shed. It's just not successful. They just don't. I mean, I'm sure some of the Texas Indigos would eat right out of the egg, but I generally wait.
Are the Texas Indigos usually the easiest to get started?
By far, not even close. I would say
really?
90% of Texas Indigos require no scenting. They'll just eat mice right out of the gate.
No kidding.
Yeah. Not even close.
Huh.
Yeah.
I wonder do you think that in their native range, there's more rodents available or something?
Who knows? I have no idea. Maybe.
Wow.
Maybe.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do you get the stubborn feeders started?
Well, that's the tricky part, right? Because they, as I mentioned earlier, in the wild, they're really prey generalists, so they might be wired to want different things. If you're trying to get gray-banded king snakes to eat, you're reasonably certain that if they don't want mice, they want lizards, right? And you're going to be scenting with lizards. These guys, you have to try different things. And so for me, every individual snake has an index card, and I'm taking notes every time I try something, and I'm writing down if it works or if it doesn't work or whatever else. So to give an idea, some want a live mouse instead of a frozen thawed mouse. Some want a frozen thawed mouse instead of a live mouse. Mm-hmm. Don't ask me why. It's just the thing. Some of them want poultry. So chick or quail might work. And you're either giving pieces of the chick or the quail, or you're scenting a pinky or a fuzzy with it. Some want fish. And then when you're talking about fish, there are different types of fish, and some fish works better than others. I'm telling you, there's an endless list of things that one individual snake might want, and you have to go through the progression. So I've used silver sides, I've used tilapia, I've used catfish. I've had pretty good success with salmon. In general, I think when I do have access to wild fish, whether it's bass or bluegill or something that we've caught, or trout, that can work pretty well also. In general, I found that they don't like frogs as much as they like toads. They'll like going toads. But again, maybe one wants a toad and the other one wants a lizard. Maybe one wants quail and the other one wants fish. Maybe one wants salmon and the other one wants trout.
Wow.
So it can be a struggle. And when you have, several clutches, it can really take some time and some effort to go through it all. So, but eventually they go. And what you'll find is that they do have aggressive feeding responses. And once you kind of get that pattern of they're eating, no matter what it is that they're eating, it doesn't matter what they eat, just get them something. And as soon as they start eating something, then there's a period of time where they just start eating anything. And that's when they're ready for a new home.
Man. So do you offer the food and just see if they go for it? And if they don't go for it, if you've offered all these different food items and they just won't go for it, then do you have to assist feed?
It can come to that. And we'll use a rat tail or something like that. It can come to that. We try to avoid it, but it can come to that for sure. And there is some difference between the subspecies. One thing that will work on an eastern indigo, and I have a clip of this on YouTube, is it's a method that breeders have been using for a while. But if you hold the snake about an inch or two behind the neck, and then you take a live pinky or something and you bop it in the head a little bit and get it to bite, and then you hold really still, and it's got it in its mouth. And sometimes with enough trials with this, they'll just start swallowing. And Easterns that technique works better on Easterns than other Drymarchon, so they'll at least do that. And you don't have to worry about, assist feeding or something like that. But you develop this whole bag of tricks when you've got a large volume of Drymarchon to feed every year.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, damn, we went through the whole process of reproducing, from getting babies all the way to getting them started.
Right.
Are there any morphs like albinos or anything like that with Drymarchon?
Yeah. So the most common one is, was it 2014? I think that there were some exanthic black-tailed crebos produced, and that came from multiple sources in the same season. There was some people in Northern California called GBU Enterprises that randomly hatched out some exanthics, and as the story would go, I had to have them, So I was talking with them about acquiring them, and we had agreed to meet. And the day before I was going to get in the car and drive up there, I hatched some of my own. Like randomly in the same year. And so, so the exanthic blacktails are out there, and, we have some, and there are a handful of people are in the country who have them, and there's some overseas now too. They have them in Europe, and they're pretty popular in Asia as well. We also this year a couple years ago, we produced an exanthic red Mexican indigo.
Wow.
Maybe an erythristic could be a better term because it has no red or orange on it. It's just black and white, but it came out of a red clutch. And then there's purportedly an Eastern Indigo albino or exanthic or leucistic or something going on in Europe, but I don't know too much about that in the U.S. I don't believe they're in the U.S. So there are a couple morphs here and there, And like you asked about the Drymarchon community, some people are hot and cold on them. They're gorgeous. They're really cool. But the people that are really focused on, inbreeding and all of that, they kind of poo-poo some of the morph stuff because they think it leads to, inbreeding and the gene pool going down the drain, which, obviously can happen when you're talking about morphs.
How the heck did you pop out exanthics like the same year? How does that happen?
It's bizarre, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the speculation is the lineage that I produced them out of. I had been producing that lineage for a decade, and I'd been selling them all over the country. And so obviously that gene was in there somewhere. And so what I was probably doing was inadvertently selling possible hets, for a decade, and just sooner or later it just popped up.
That's so crazy.
We weren't able to trace their lineage back to mine, but we only had so much knowledge about where animals had come from and whatever else. But I think it'd be a pretty big coincidence if it didn't originally come from the same lineage, but who knows?
Yeah.
We know they're compatible though, that their stuff is bred to my stuff, and it produces more exanthics.
That's wild. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
If you were only able to keep one Drymarchon, one species, which one would it be, or subspecies?
Also a tough one. Yeah, I mean, the Eastern Indigo is pretty iconic, right?
Yeah.
I think, I don't know that I can give you one answer. The Eastern Indigos are up there. That would be essential. And I love me a good black-tail crebo. Yeah, those are hard to go against. I love the facial markings, the war paint they've got on the side of the face. And I love the contrast between the body and the tail. So, yeah.
Blacktails are beautiful. I'm actually on your website right now looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
And the availability you have from year to year, are you going to have different flavors of, like Easterns in Texas from one year to the next, just based off of your pairing?
Yeah. So, it depends on the subspecies, right? So to kind of run it down, with Easterns, there's really only two variations. There's what we call red throats, which have the red face and the red throat. And then there's what we call the black phase, which don't have the red. So that's pretty simple. Mexican indigos, same idea. There's a red phase and there's a black phase, and that's more based on, locality ranges in the wild. But, reds and blacks with the Mexicans. Texas indigos, they're pretty variable. They're kind of all over. We do have lineages of animals that are quite a bit more red than the next. And I know you and I have been talking about those. So I've got some of those red ones. And then I have, just standard classic looking Texas Indigos. Unicolor Cribos are pretty straightforward. Yellowtail Cribos, pretty straightforward. Just, some pairings produce more yellow than others. Blacktail Cribos probably have the most to offer because you have what I call more of a clean lineage, where the top half of the body is really there's almost no black on it. It's just a straight, creamy looking yellow top half. And then there are others that are more of a mottled lineage where you've got black flecking throughout the top half, which a lot of people like. You also have the Xanthics, like we mentioned. And then you also have there's another phenotype of a red blacktail, which, when you look at iNaturalist and records of things in the wild, they seem to be coming from the Yucatan in Mexico, where you see red ones like that. But we've got a group of those where, it's a red snake or, anywhere from orange to red and everything in between. With a black tail. And so you've got that flavor as well. So they're all same snake, just different paint jobs. And, so there are different things within the subspecies where you like one look or another look where, there's some different options for you.
Yeah. I'm looking at this jet black Eastern Indigo right now, and it is just crazy.
Yeah.
It is absolutely beautiful. And the red Texas Indigos you have available right now are just absolutely bananas.
Those
really
are cool
beautiful.
too. We're excited about those. They're really robust. They're even compared to other Texans, they're big, thick babies and big, thick adults. And my adults are relatively placid. So they're cool. We like those.
Relatively placid.
As long as you don't smell like a rat.
What about the what's the skinny on the unicolor Cribos?
Yeah, unicolors are cool. I'm of the personal belief when you look at their ranges in the wild and you read the original paper that described taxonomically what unicolor Cribos are. Unicolor Cribos and blacktail Cribos, you can essentially think of them as the same thing. A unicolor will have, as the name would suggest, kind of more of a similar tail color as the top half, whereas a blacktail Cribo will have that really dark black tail. But when you look at records in the wild and you look at their ranges in the wild, that there's variability of everything in between. So you have some that will have a brown tail, or dark brown, light tan, whatever tails. And the ranges do kind of overlap in some places. So I generally think of unicolors and blacktails as kind of the same snake, but just different looks of the same snake. And so when people buy a unicolor, they generally want to have a really light tail. And when they buy a blacktail, they generally want a real black tail. But the reality is in the wild, there's a lot of in-between animals that are more of a brown tail. It's not generally as desired in the pet trade, but you see some of the imports coming in from Nicaragua and things, and people will sell them as a unicolor or a blacktail, and really it's, in my mind, they're kind of the same snake. It's more just a different color.
Yeah, they're absolutely stunning. It's really cool seeing where it's one solid color and they still have the war paint, as you put it,
on the face.
Oh man, yeah, just the contrast is incredible.
Yeah,
really beautiful animals. And then the yellowtail Cribos. Can you give me like a little bit of a background on them?
Yeah, I mean, yellowtail Cribos have the biggest range. They're literally the entirety of the South American continent, and they can be kind of variable, but the bulk of them are imported into the United States from either Suriname or Guyana. Which are the two countries that are still open for exporting wild-caught animals. And so you do get a lot of wild-caught imports coming in, and there's some variability in their look. But in general, when you're kind of trying to choose an animal for you, they sort of have a, gray, dark gray top half with the yellow tail, and then the amount of yellow that is on the head and on the face can vary by individual or by lineage. And so there are different looks that you can kind of go for within yellowtails. But in general, most of them have, originated from wild-caught lineage being imported from either Suriname or Guyana. And those two
Okay.
countries are really right next to each other. There's some differences in the way the Suriname ones look as opposed to the Guyana ones, but there's a lot of overlap too.
Okay. All right, John. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, listen, thanks for hanging out and having me on. It's always fun to sit and hang out and chat about snakes.
Oh man, thank you. I hope that I can own one of your Texas red phase at some point. I mean, it's interesting, talking to you and hearing how much care and effort you put into these animals, and that you might be able to find a lower cost animal on Morph Market, right?
Right.
But your quarantine, right? Your biosecurity, the fecals run on new animals that are coming into your collection, the care that you put into these animals, the decades of your life that you've invested into these animals, it speaks volume. The passion, I mean, you're constantly smiling while you're talking about them, so it's like, it's an incredible thing. And I'm happy that there's geeks and nerds like you and, all these other awesome people out there that are taking care of these animals in captivity and reproducing them.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, like I said, if I didn't like it, I wouldn't do it because it is a lot of work.
Do you ever bring them into the classroom?
I do keep snakes in my classroom. However, I don't do the indigos. I like my students to be somewhat familiar with things they might see in the wild around here, but I also like things that are very handleable for them. So, being a field herper, I'll go out and I'll collect a couple rosy boas that I'll keep in the
Nice.
classroom, and they're able to learn about snakes through that.
Do you reproduce rosies?
I don't. I did once years ago, but it was just more of a fun thing. No, it's more of I like finding them in the wild, as a lot of people here in Southern California do. They're a lot of fun to find in the wild, and 99% of them I just take a picture and leave them on their way. But I like to have one or two in my classroom that I keep for the students to look at.
Yeah, they're the Antaresia of the boa world in my mind, with the bite first, ask questions later.
Well, that's funny too, because people will say, well, why are you taking them out of the wild? And you can just go buy one. But the dynamic with rosy boas is that the wild ones just don't bite. They just don't bite.
Really?
No, they don't bite. And because of, when rosy boas bite you, it's a feed response. And in I'm being kind of glib, but in contrast with the intelligence of Eastern indigos, rosy boas are not very smart.
Yeah.
And they'll take their nose, and if they feel something fleshy, they don't smell, they don't think, they just bite it and then start trying to swallow your wrist. And the captive ones do that, very frequently. But the wild ones just don't do that. So I'll just go collect one out of the wild and bring it to my classroom, and they make great captives, and they're really docile, and they never bite, and they're totally cool. And if I start seeing one start kind of getting a little bit more of aggressive feeding response and whatever else, then it's time for that one to move on, and I'll go get another one.
Man, I wish you were my kid's teacher, dude.
They like it. It's a good time. It's always neat to see them when they're initially scared and apprehensive, and next thing you know, they're holding them and laughing and joking and having a good time. So it's fun. You're
probably creating the next generation of herpers.
Maybe so.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great picking your brain. And Lucas Lee and Phil King, I want to thank, because they both recommended you, and you satisfied all my curiosities.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. Appreciate being on here and having an opportunity to hang out and chat.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. You got it. Talk to you later.